Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Biz Jet TV. Today with me I have a special guest, Paul Craig, coming to us from Nashville in Tennessee, and we're going to be talking about his book, The Killing Zone, and the research that he's done on aircraft accidents and pilot training and that. That's what we're going to be talking in today. Paul, thank you for being on the show.
Well, thank you so much, and we really appreciate all that you do and Biz Jet TV does for informing us and keeping us safe. So thank you for all the work you do.
Thanks, Paul. So let's start off with you and how you got involved in flying. How, when, why? Tell us the story.
Well, it's an interesting story because nobody in my family have an aviation background. They're all great people, but none of them were pilots. So I never had any exposure to it as a younger kid, other than just, fascination, seeing an airplane fly over. But I guess, gosh, it's been about 50 some odd years ago. There was a high school teacher here in Nashville. He was an English and a drama teacher, but he was also a private pilot. And so in the summer, I think, of 1971, he went to a Tennessee aerospace education teacher workshop, which was about 4 weeks of a class that tried to help and model for teachers how to bring aviation topics into the mainstream classroom. We know kids are fascinated with aviation, so we use that as a hook, right? I don't really like math, but I can calculate fuel burn, and that's math. And so that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to incorporate aviation into his class. And about 3 years after that, I happened to be a junior at that same high school. I guess I needed a science credit, so he took what he learned at that workshop. He made what essentially was like a private pilot ground school class in high school, last period of the day, and I took that class. And it's the first exposure I ever had. His name was Bill Garris, but we all called him Big G. Yeah. And so we went through the whole class, and we took introductory flights at local airports. And I remember that before we left class, the last day, Big G told us, if by some fluke, by some miracle, any of you actually become, any of you knuckleheads actually become pilots, then you got to come back and give me a flight. Well, it took about 20 years, but I did do it. I did look up Big G and strapped him in, and we went off for a flight. So I always remember to tell people that if you think about it, there's probably someone in your past, in your career, who helped you, who guided you, who showed you this cool thing about aviation. And, as I talk to people, I learn more and more people have just such an experience. So I encourage you, if those people are still around, to contact them, because, we appreciate them more now than we did then, because we didn't know any better then. And so sure enough, and then full circle, now I became the director of the very same teacher workshop that Big G took 50 some odd years ago. And so we hope to be passing this on, of course, to people like us in the next generation.
So now you're teaching at the Middle Tennessee State University, and you're head of the aviation program. So tell us a bit about this program that you're heading over there.
Well, I'm head of the graduate program. The department is bigger than just the graduate program. We do pilot training, flight dispatch, aviation management, maintenance management, technology, and UAS. And so it's a fairly big, it's one of the larger programs in the United States. And we do provide flight training. And these days, of course, with the pilot market as it is, it's a very popular program. We've grown to be the biggest program in the university. So it is an exciting time. There's lots of challenges going on these days. The pilot students, they understand that, the market is such with a pilot shortage as it is, that if they just do their work and if they make good grades and if they do their job, then there's every expectation that they can actually make a career out of this, either in corporate flying, business, aviation, airlines. And that's not like when I came out of school. We've been around a few years. We've seen the business go up and down, and it is a cycle. It'll probably be down again, but it's up now, and we hope it will last for a while. But when I got out of school, there was just no expectation to go to work as a pilot back then. And so it's an exciting time. But you know what? It also provides a lot of stress and a lot of pressure on curriculum designers and flight instructors, because we still have to do the job. They want to do it fast because they know the sooner they get a seniority number at the airlines, the more money they're going to make the rest of their career.
That, I mean, the younger generation are used to, ordering something on their phone and Amazon turns up 2 hours later. Yeah. We didn't have that back in the day. So how have the students changed today compared to 10, 15 years ago?
Well, I think that's you just hit on it right there. They expect instant, information. They expect things to happen right now. And, they're very used to being able to call up information on their phone. The debate is, should they already know that stuff, or is just calling it up okay enough? I don't really know the full answer to that question, but that's probably one of the things, the mental adjustment that older educators have to make for the newer generation. But it's I don't want to say it's a tug of war, but it is an effort to make sure that we do things with the basics, done the right way, even though there's this pressure to do it quick. We don't want it to, quick is not always quality. And so that's probably one of the biggest things, like the last 10, 15 years, is that students know the job is waiting for them if they'll just get through. And that provides a lot of stress and anxiety sometimes. And so those are issues that we deal with this generation. Now, they're not all bad. They're great kids. They know their stuff when they put the effort to it, and most of them do. So I don't want to paint the incorrect picture. We love working with these students.
Yeah, it's just a different way of putting things to them. Now, let's talk about your work regarding pilot training and aircraft accidents that you talk about in The Killing Zone. Now, I have the second edition of the book. You told me the other day that you're working on the third edition. But tell us a bit about what is The Killing Zone, and
Well, first of all, the title, The Killing Zone, it's kind of stark, right? It's kind of abrupt. I guess it's sort of on purpose, though, because it's meant to take pilots by the shoulders and shake them and say, you know what? None of us are bulletproof. We're not invincible. Accidents can and do happen to the best of us. You can't say, well, I'm a great pilot. I work hard. I'm meticulous. I study, so it can't happen to me. Trust me, people have been in accidents and survived will tell you they were too. And you're right. The Killing Zone, that title is a little stark, but that's kind of on purpose. The idea was to try to take the accident numbers and see at what point in a pilot's training and career would they be the most susceptible to an accident. And so what I did in the first edition and the second edition, now working on the third edition, is to find out the flight time that a pilot had on the day that they had their accident. The second edition, the one you've got there, covers the time from about 2000 to about 2012. And the third edition that will be out next year will pick up where that left off and take us through the last 12 years with so much change that has gone on. And take a look at the accidents there. Well, what I discovered was...
Let's focus on... Now, you talk about changes. So what have you seen change from first edition to second edition to third edition? There wasn't, I mean, I've noticed a few things. I mean, before, accidents used to happen on takeoff and landing. Now there's other reasons as well. So let's expand on that.
Thanks for that question, because the first edition started with the accident data from 1983, and I picked that as my starting point because that's the first year I became a flight instructor. So I figure anything that's happened since then happened on my watch, right? So I should have done something about it. Well, that first edition really was very traditional. There was not a lot of technology in general aviation. That's where I specialize in, including business and corporate aviation. In the second edition, what had changed was we had GPS moving maps. We had laser ring gyros that were now affordable enough to go in general aviation airplanes. We had glass cockpits, computerized airplanes. It was a whole new world. And to the younger folks who'd always grown up with computers, it wasn't as big a deal as it was to the older folks who grew up with round dials. But that was the biggest difference. But then now the last 12 years, my goodness, we've seen a lot of different new things that have come in, especially with technology. There's been I guess an explosion might be the right word of unmanned aerial systems or drones, amateur built aircraft, light sport aircraft, new emphasis placed on pilot mental health.
The parachute.
The parachute on the Cirrus and others. So yeah, this is aviation. It's never going to stay the same. So the killing zone was.
Let's say this now. All these things have changed. However, over the last 50 years, we're still flying at the same speed.
Yeah.
And I wonder why we haven't gone faster. I mean, everything else has gone faster. Our computers are faster. Our phones are faster. But airplanes, commercial aircraft, not allowed to go more than Mach 1.
Right.
That's going to change soon.
Well, that's a really interesting point. The title killing zone comes from the fact that if you take a pilot's flight time, when they start off as a student pilot up to about 50 hours, they are very safe. There are very few accidents among student pilots, and common sense, I think, would tell us that the reason that that's the case is that those student pilots are under the supervision of a flight instructor, that their solo flights, either in the local area or on a flight to another airport, have to be approved and endorsed by a flight instructor. And that instructor can have a disagreement and say, no, not today. The wind is a little too high, and put a veto on that flight. And that flight never happens, and therefore that accident never happens. But once a pilot gets their private certificate or recreational pilot, light sport, in other words, when they become pilot in command of their own and they no longer are under the direct supervision of an instructor, well, things seem to change. From 50 hours until 350 hours, that's the zone where pilots have the greatest number of accidents, both fatal and non-fatal accidents. And so that's the area we wanted to attack, to go after the people that are building time through that zone. Now, quickly, you got to be careful. I didn't just count
the supervised.
Right. Once they're on their own, things seem to go awry. when they're not in, let's put it this way, formalized training. They're not.
I mean, Paul, the same happens with private jets. I mean, you get, first of all, and I said this in my book, The Quantum Economy, the private jet industry has 9.2 times worse safety record than the airlines. So what does that mean? You're spending thousands of dollars to fly on a Learjet from Nashville to Orlando, and you're spending 15, 20 times more than it would cost by going with the airlines. Right. But you're actually 10 times more chances of crashing and dying on that private jet. And this is something, and so the question is, well, then why does this happen? Again, Mr. Entrepreneur spends $8 million on buying a jet, and he flies himself. He's not being supervised.
Well, you hit on an almost direct parallel between the two issues in the worlds of aviation, because you're right. When there's not a built-in safety net, you used it 9 times. I'm saying the zone is a greater amount,
So, Paul, now we talked about accidents, the killing zone. When do these accidents actually happen, and how has the phase of flight changed over the last 10, 15 years? Because before they were always happening on landing and takeoff. Now they seem to be happening in other areas.
Well, they still happen landing and takeoff. So that hasn't been resolved completely. But the National Transportation and Safety Board, they do, in fact, categorize accidents, but based on their phase of flight. And for many, many years, the number one accident cause was when visual pilots would fly into instrument meteorological conditions, like a VFR pilot pressing ahead into bad weather. And that still happens too. But now, and I guess it's been over the last 10 years, a category has emerged as being the highest number, and that's called loss of control. Now, loss of control could be an overlap, right? Because if a pilot goes into the clouds, becomes spatially disoriented, loses control of the airplane, that's a loss of control accident. But in my research, what I've tried to do is separate that out. And loss of control really is just allowing the airplane to get too slow, and an aerodynamic stall takes place. Sometimes a spin follows that. And these things do happen very close to the ground, because that's when we are the slowest to begin with, right? So that's the part that has been, I guess, in the last, as you say, about the last 10 years or so, has become, it's kind of hard to say, it has surpassed, it's become the number one accident, with VFR and to IMC being a close second. But
And
you know, there are a lot of overlaps.
I honestly think that's due down to training. I think they've dumbed down the training a little bit. I mean, spin training is not mandatory. I know guys that are captains of Airbus 380s and whatever, never been into a spin in their life, never been into an upset recovery situation in a real plane. They've done something in the simulator, but not in a real plane. Right. So when the airplane gets into one of these situations, A, they don't recognize it, so they just crash. B, they recognize it and don't know how to get out of it, so they crash. And C, they recognize it, they take action, they recover, everything's fine. This is what happened with the Falcon 7X a few years ago. The pilot was an ex-French military pilot. The airplane went into an upset situation. He recognized it immediately, recovered, and the airplane was safe. They lost a few thousand feet, but they were up at altitude and everything was okay. If this guy hadn't been on board, and he was the first officer, he wasn't the captain, he spotted it, he had control, and he reacted in the correct way because of the type of training that he had received.
Yeah, in the States, the only spin training that is required is when you're training to become a flight instructor, and it's really just a demonstration flight. I had the privilege of training under the late, great Bill Kirshner, who was an aerobatics and spin researcher. Yeah. And Bill was a very high proponent on the fact that if you have upset training, that in the future, when something should happen, that you'd have just this innate built-in muscle memory kind of setup so that you'd know what to do. And many of these loss of control accidents, it seems like it could have been prevented so simply with a little extra training in that area.
Yeah, and I honestly think, you know, what should happen is pilots should go to do this kind of training in an airplane every year, just to keep the senses and everything going, so that, you know, if a situation does arise, they know, they recognize it immediately, they know how to react, and off we go. So other thing that has surfaced recently, Harvard University did a study in 2016 of nearly 2,000 pilots, and this is to do with mental health. And they found 13% of these pilots, which is 260, met the criteria for clinical depression, and 4%, which is 80 pilots, had suicidal thoughts. Now, this is a bit worrying that you get on American Airlines flight or British Airways flight, and the guy up front decided he's going to commit suicide and take everybody with him. I mean, this is a new thing, and it's not just a new thing in the pilot world. It's a growing problem and concern in society, which is obviously pilots being human beings has crept into the pilot world as well. What do you think we can do about this?
Well, you're right. It's you know, humans, the human population, have pilots as a subset. So if there's going to be a problem in society, then there's no big surprise. It'll be a problem for pilots as well. And it has been a problem for a while. It's become more discussed recently, and that's a good thing. You know, in years gone by, if someone was, you know, just feeling the feeling of depression or extra fatigue or stress just from things in life, they were very reluctant to mention this or say anything about it as a person in the pilot profession, for fear that, you know, if they were seen as having a mental issue, that this was going to be the end of their flying career. And if they worked their whole life to get to this point to be a pilot, why would they throw it away by telling someone that you know, I think maybe I'm depressed? And so the idea was, you know, you're just supposed to suck it up. You just, you know, you keep that to yourself. And of course, that's probably, I'm no clinical psychologist, but that's probably the worst advice, right? To bottle it up and keep it pent up. And so there's been this real disincentive to try to seek help. But in the last several years, that there has been a sea change about this. And many organizations, corporations, airlines, and the FAA have taken a new direction. Now it's more to try to assist the pilot rather than bring down some kind of enforcement on the pilot. First of all, we need pilots. The pilots that we're talking about are experienced, and we don't want them to leave the cockpit. The industry needs their experience. Yeah. So it would be better for us to take some kind of mitigating circumstances or actions to keep them. And so the advice I would give is that if you do feel overwhelmed, if you're depressed, if whatever some other the terminology that fall under the category of mental fitness, then speak to somebody. Talk to a counselor, and the FAA Airmen's Medical Examiners are now all very well versed in this, to the point now that some of the FAA medical examiners have taken on additional training and participate in the Human Intervention and Motivation Study, which is HIMS or HIMS.
Yeah.
And this is their job. They are to work on a case basis with pilots. Some medications that may have been able to be that were taken in the past would have banned a pilot.
Yeah.
Some of those are no longer banned, but it is a case-by-case situation. And they work with the pilot to come up with a plan to bring them back to health and back to the cockpit, feeling better and resuming their career.
I mean, so, I'll give you my take. I mean, if I had my own private jet and I had to hire some pilots and I knew one of them was on medication of some sort for something mental, I would be deeply concerned. I would, much prefer people to be fit, both physically and mentally, because there are no surprises. One of the causes of this depression and mental problems that some pilots are having is due to fatigue. They're flying too much. I mean, back 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, pilots weren't flying 900, 1,000 hours a year. Now they are. And especially if you're working for some of the airlines in the Middle East and whatever, where those guys, some of them are even flying 1,400 hours a year. You know the way they do it? They're flying 900 hours in the cockpit and they're flying 500 hours sitting in the bunk in the back.
Right.
So they take off, they fly for a couple of hours, then they go back, they sleep for 7, 8 hours, and then they come back again. So because 900 hours is the limit in the cockpit in most countries, but they're saying, well, you're not in the cockpit, you're in the bunk, but you're still in the airplane. And, you can try and sleep as long as you want on an airplane, but we all know, it's difficult to sleep on an airplane. Maybe you can sleep 4 or 5 hours max, but having a good 8-hour of sleep on a plane, it's not going to happen because there's so many noises and lights and everything that interfere, and the altitude, and your body, senses that it's away from the ground, and that creates discomfort. So your sleep is never long enough and never the quality that you get in order for your body to regenerate, which is key. And if you're not regenerating properly and you're going over from time zone to time zone to time zone, your whole biological clock goes out of sync, and that does affect your mental health as well. And I think that's another one of the reasons why we're seeing this, as well as, this medication that doctors are giving people, just, oh, take this. And some of these pills have side effects, which can cause suicide and things like that. So it's a difficult thing. But I mean, I would say for private jet owner, and I'm not trying to discriminate against pilots that do have mental health, because, it needs to be dealt with, but it needs to probably be dealt with in a different way. First of all, you shouldn't Mr. Airline management people, don't fly your pilots 1,400 hours a year. That's dangerous. They are human beings. They're not supermen or superwomen. So, that's the first thing. And make sure these guys are fit. And they're eating right. The other thing is airplane food. Airplane food is bad for you. If you're an airline pilot, you're eating that stuff every day. Many people know that food is actually cooked a month before, then put in a freezer, and then put on the airplane a few hours before the flight. So by the time it gets on the pilot's plate or the passenger's plate, the nutritional value is almost zero. And so that's another issue. I mean, we discovered this, my wife and I discovered this a few years of me into the airline pilot flying thing that I was doing. And she said, don't eat the airplane food anymore. I'll take your own food. So she would prepare the meals for me. And,
nice.
And if I was down route, I'd go to the supermarket and I'd buy my stuff and take my own food. Because that way I was being, because you're flying, I was flying 4 sectors nearly every day for 5 days in a row. So you're flying 20 sectors. You're up in the air about 10 hours a day. And so, you're going to eat, of course.
Of course.
We eat something that's decent, and not that was cooked a month before and then put in the freezer.
Well, let's check back to that one point that started that discussion, which was, if I'm hiring someone to be my pilot, I want to know, if they're mentally fit. Well, I think that I would rather that person seek some discretionary conversations with my airman's medical exam, maybe a HIMS inspector or a medical examiner, rather than keeping it all inside, rather than penting it up and exploding someday, right? I mean, those are probably certainly not the right terms, but you understand, I would encourage them to go
physical exercise. Physical exercise is something that helps relieve stress And it helps also mentally as well as physically. So even, exercising regularly can help to prevent you falling into that trap of having, mental issues. So there are things that can be done. But, I think the airlines need to be a bit more careful. And if you're a private jet owner and you need to hire a pilot, it's always best to go through someone you trust's network. Because if I hire people I know, I know, I mean, most of the time I'd know if they'd had a mental issue or not. I'd maybe know their family, know their kids, know their wives, maybe go play tennis with them. You know this guy for 10, 15 years, you know what they're like, as a person, as a personality, besides as a pilot as well. I think these are all things that can be done because, these so-called monkey tests that a lot of the airlines put you through. I mean, people can fake and get through. I've seen people do that before. They go on a 3-day course to learn how to pass the test, and they pass the test and they get in the airline, and then they're an absolute nightmare to deal with. I've seen this happen all the time. And the airlines spend thousands and thousands, if not millions of dollars on these monkey tests, 5-day, 6-day selection. It's like they're selecting someone to go into space. When the best way to select a pilot is very simple. You have 10 pilots in your organization, ring them up and say, guys, we need another 2 pilots. Can you all recommend one person? Someone that you know, someone you think would fit in with us? That's the best way to do it. And they come in for a chat for an hour. They tick the box. The boss picks the best 2 out of the 10. And that's it.
Well, I guess the bottom line these days is the approach, the attitude toward these mental health questions has changed. It doesn't have to be a stigma. It's still not a smooth process if you have to work with the FAA to get some kind of waiver or something like that. But nevertheless, the message is that it's not, you're not condemned. You're not losing your career, your livelihood. So it's better to come forward, figure this out, and get well and get back into it. Just like you said, and you might know somebody for a long time and still not know exactly what's going on.
That's very true.
So that's why we really like to depend on the professionals.
Yeah, I mean, there are 2 sides to it. One is preventing this from happening, and the other one is curing it when it does happen. Pilots need to have both systems in place. The airline or the flight department needs to have those systems in place to help these people, to prevent and to cure. And I think that's really, really important because, yes, as you said, a pilot that you may be known for 15, 20 years suddenly has some mental issue that he's not telling anybody about, not even his closest friends or his wife or children or whoever. And they just
I might not be able to detect it. I'm not a trained professional in that area. So yeah, I got to turn to those who are.
Yeah. So anyway, this is an issue which is kind of growing in society in general, but also in the pilot world. So we just need to be mindful that this does exist, and pilots aren't supermen or superwomen. So, this is a problem that's there. Now, let's talk about advanced training because we talked about accidents and that. So we just talked about prevention of the mental health thing. Well, preventing accidents. And, someone gets qualified, they're a commercial pilot, they fly their own Citation CJ4. What can they do as far as advanced training is concerned to keep them sharp?
Well, you mentioned earlier that the corporate world has I think you said 9.2 times more probability of having an accident than the airlines.
And the other stat which just came out is that the fatality of accidents in private aviation compared to commercial aviation is actually 200 times more. Wow. Because the planes are smaller. So obviously a small plane, when it crashes, it's than a bigger plane.
So I guess an obvious question would be, since the airline's record is so good and ours is not as good, what are they doing that's producing those positive results that we should also be doing? What can we do to emulate what they're doing? Well, what do? Well, they have constant training. This is to your point. An airline pilot is constantly cycling through recurrent training, simulator training. They spend time at the training center every year to be constantly recertified. And in the general aviation, corporate and business world, there's really no backup to ensure that happens. You can do it, of course, but it many times it's just voluntary. So there's the gap, as opposed to, and there's probably many others, but that's the one that's glaring. So when you set up a corporate aviation department, when you fly your own, whether that be a small airplane or a business jet or whatever it might be, it would pay to emulate what those people do, those pros do, and set up your own training program that is periodic. It's not just here, and not just what minimums the insurance company requires you to do. that's a good start, but that's the start.
Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of things that need to be done. I mean, in the airlines, you've got, instructors flying with you from time to time. You've got guys on the jump seat checking you. You've got ground school. You've got different video stuff you need to watch and have the boxes ticked. Read this new book, read that new manual that's come out, or seminars. One airline I was with, we had Boeing come over every year to give us a 2-day seminar. So they were over for like a whole week, or 2 weeks sometimes, and we all cycled through for 2 days with Boeing, and they were talking to us about, approaches and go arounds and all the different information that they discovered over time. And that was very, very useful and just makes you think, in a different way. Icing is another one. We did lots of training every winter. We would do winter operations training, and every winter there would be something new in there that they discovered that you would learn. So it's not just do it once, tick the box. No, discoveries are being made all the time. New accidents have happened and whatever. So we look at the new accident. What happened in this situation where there was icing on the wing and then the plane crashed and everyone died? What could have the pilots done different? All that kind of thing is really important. But when you're the entrepreneur and you fly your own airplane, sometimes finding the time to do that is difficult.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you talk about advanced training, you automatically start thinking about flight simulators and 3D goggles and things like that we have. But advanced training is also the ability to practice the skill to say no sometimes, and that's difficult. Let's take a look real quick at two different scenarios where you have a corporate or a business aircraft, and they hire a pilot. That's one situation. Or maybe it's a corporate or business aircraft, and the owner of the plane is the pilot. Yeah. Those are two different things, right? Well, at the university where I am, we have an executive airplane, and in the early years, I would fly with the university president, not the one we have now, but one prior. And I remember the first time he ever flew on the airplane with me, I was nervous, and I got up my courage and I went over and had a talk with him. And now think about it. Now the university president's sort of like a CEO. He's, 7 or 8 rungs of the hierarchy above me. He's my boss 7 times over. He's the kind of guy that, doesn't have people say no to him a lot. All right. And so I had this discussion. I said, now I know you're the president, and I work for you. But as soon as we get on this airplane and I close that airplane door, then I'm the president. And I'm going to make the final decisions. And I'll just tell you up front that there's just simply no meeting, no conference, no recruiting trip that is so important that we will risk our life for. And he respected that, and he never questioned me. But it is a mindset, right? Because they had spent, and same with businesses, spent a large sum of money to not only buy the airplane, but for the upkeep on the airplane, the insurance, the pilots. And why do they have an airplane in the first place? Well, they want it because it's convenient. They can maximize their work day. They can go to different places, meet with different people, go to different factories, and then be home that night. So in their mind, the money they spent was for this convenience. So if one day you come up and say, by the way, we can't do it, that blows their mind. What do you mean we can't do it? I've paid millions so that we can do it, and you're telling me no? So you can see that's going to be a very difficult thing for them to accept. And in that second case where the owner is the pilot, now they're wearing both hats. And are they really going to be able to say no to themselves, right? In training, we do a diversionary flight where we take off, say, from Nashville, we're going to go to Chicago. And it's a training flight. So the student already knows before we take off that we're really not going to go to Chicago. Somewhere along the way, the instructor is going to say, okay, the weather's bad in Chicago, so now what are you going to do? And so they divert to Indianapolis. Okay. So when that happens, everybody's happy. The lesson was a success. But think about it. In a real world circumstance, there would have been a reason we were going to Chicago. It wasn't just a training exercise. We were going to a meeting. We were signing contracts. We were, millions of dollars might have been on the line. So a diversion in Indianapolis is not just an inconvenience. This is a big deal. And so when it's a big deal, it's hard to make a big deal decision not to go. And so those consequences that you have to deal with in the real world are something that you kind of have to be familiar with and practice, because you'll be in situations where it's going to be hard to say no. And if you are the owner pilot together, it's very hard for you to separate the aviation decision that it's not safe to fly versus the business decision that I have to fly. And so how do you go down that line? Well, we've seen a lot of examples of people that got into positions where they didn't think they could say no. And one of the things that was interesting in my current research is that the day before Thanksgiving is a very dangerous day to fly. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Why is that? Well, because Thanksgiving is in the middle of the week, on a Thursday. Most people have to work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and they only have a few hours to get to their destination to have, family dinner for Thanksgiving. And so they take off in a situation where they ordinarily would never take off. It was just a normal Wednesday. But because of the pressure to get there, they press on, and there's many accidents on that specific day. For that reason, they were unable to separate the pressure of going versus the aeronautical decision of it's not safe to go.
Yeah, that's very interesting. The Thanksgiving one. That's
Yeah.
But you're right. You're right. I mean, it's probably the most difficult situation is when you are the pilot and the owner of the airplane, wearing those two hats, and then emotions kick in, and you need to go. There's family. It's not easy. That's why people like John Travolta, for example, who flies. He has his own airplanes. He has a whole team of pilots with him that plan and do the planning and the fuel and everything, and he just jumps in the seat and takes off and lands and maybe spends some time in the flight deck with them. But he has the professionals look after him, which is really, really important.
And Travolta trains annually at American Airlines in Dallas.
Yes, he does, and he's also a very good pilot. Because friends of mine have flown with him, and they told me he's a very good pilot, and he's sensible about it. He doesn't push people to do things they shouldn't do. He's very safety conscious, and I think that's really, really important.
You can see how that real struggle within somebody to fly or not fly is an easy decision in training, not an easy decision in business. Yeah,
exactly. Paul, thank you very much for being here on Biz Jet TV. Everybody, get yourself a copy of The Killing Zone. The link is below for you to do that. And remember to subscribe to the channel and check out this other video that we did recently with Jason Crandall. And that's all from me and from Paul on Biz Jet TV. And see you in the next one.
Be third edition next year by ASA. And thank you so much. Go for it. Biz Jet TV.